Have you ever found yourself completely fascinated by that human desire to find a theory of everything?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That urge to connect the dots.
Right. That ultimate grand sweeping framework that somehow connects the vastness of the cosmos, the microscopic details of human biology, and then, like, the deepest mysteries of the spirit.
It is a very deeply human urge to want to make the universe make sense.
It really is. And today, we are going deep into one of the most ambitious, intricate, and honestly highly provocative attempts to build exactly that kind of framework.
Yeah, for this deep dive, we are examining a translated transcript of a lecture. It was given by Rudolf Steiner on March 3rd, 1923, and is titled Color and the Human Races.
Which is part of the GA349 collection, right?
That's the one. And for some background, Steiner was the founder of Anthroposophy. That's an esoteric spiritual movement that basically attempted to bridge the physical and spiritual worlds. He used a kind of rigorous, almost scientific methodology to study the soul.
Which brings us to our mission today. We want to unpack how Steiner attempted to weave together cosmic light, human anatomy, geography, and global civilizations into just this one massive tapestry.
But before we take a single step further, we need to explicitly frame the historical context of what we are actually looking at.
Yes, absolutely. This is crucial. The text we are examining today was delivered in 1923, and it contains theories that are highly controversial. They are incredibly outdated and deeply politically and racially charged.
Right. We're dealing with early 20th century esoteric thought here. It categorizes human beings in ways that modern science and modern society completely reject.
Completely. We want to be crystal clear with you, the listener. We are absolutely not taking sides here.
Not at all.
Nor are we endorsing any of these viewpoints. Our role today is strictly impartial. We are just reporting on the contents of the original source material.
Exactly. The goal is to understand the history of this specific type of esoteric thought. We want to see how these ideas were constructed, and how thinkers of that era tried to force the sheer complexity of humanity into rigid theoretical boxes.
It's an artifact of intellectual history, and looking at it objectively helps us understand how early 20th century minds tried to synthesize the rapidly changing world around them.
Well said.
Okay, let's unpack this. Steiner bases his entire theory of human races on something that seems, at least at first glance, purely rooted in physics.
He really does.
He starts with the interaction between human beings, cosmic light, and warmth. How does he make the leap from basic thermodynamics to human skin color?
Well, he views skin color not as a biological evolution. He doesn't see it as an adaptation to ultraviolet radiation like we know today.
Right.
Instead, he sees it as a direct mechanical reflection of how different groups of humans interact with the energy of the universe.
So he sets up a sort of cosmic dichotomy.
Yes, between absorbing energy and reflecting energy. He actually uses a physics analogy here to explain this to his audience. He compares humans to what he calls black bodies and white bodies.
Think of a piece of coal versus a field of snow.
That's the exact image.
Okay, so coal absorbs all the light and heat, while snow acts like a mirror and reflects it back. How does he map that ordinary concept of coal and snow onto human populations?
He maps it directly onto human geography. When he looks at the African continent, he claims that the black race absorbs the maximum possible amount of light and heat from the universe.
And because a human is a living organism, this cosmic energy doesn't just pass straight through.
Exactly. It stops right at the surface of the skin. According to Steiner, that absolute absorption is exactly what makes the skin black. It is the literal physical manifestation of taking in the entirety of the cosmos's warmth and light.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is how Steiner immediately connects this concept of external light absorption to internal human biology and neuroanatomy.
Because he doesn't just leave it at the skin layer.
No, all of that absorbed heat and light has to go somewhere.
He claims it creates a continuous cooking process inside the human body. He literally describes it as if they're being cooked by the sun from the inside out.
Yes, he does.
Where does he think all this intense internal metabolic energy ends up?
In his framework, it forces the hyperdevelopment of the hindbrain. The hindbrain becomes the seat of the instinctual life, the desire life, and the deep metabolism.
Because they're absorbing so much cosmic energy.
Right, that energy fuels a massive metabolic fire. And to support this, he introduces a highly specific, honestly strange anatomical claim about the eyes.
Oh, the optic nerve thing.
Yeah. He states that the optic nerve crosses directly into the hindbrain. And because the hindbrain is so hyperdeveloped by this cosmic cooking, it makes them, and these are his words, frightfully crafty and clever observers of the world.
It is such a wild leap from light absorption to brain anatomy to behavioral traits. Does he apply the same mechanical logic to the rest of the globe?
He does. Moving to Asia and what he terms the yellow race, the dynamic shifts.
Right. Unlike the black body, which absorbs everything, the yellow body reflects some light, but still absorbs a great deal.
However, this energy isn't processed in the deep metabolism or the hindbrain. Because they are absorbing slightly less light, the metabolism has to rely on its own forces. So the processing of this cosmic energy moves up.
Into the chest.
Yes, specifically to breathing and blood circulation.
And because the energy processing moves up, Steiner claims it develops the midbrain.
The midbrain becomes the center of this cosmic processing. He actually gives an observational example to his audience here.
Oh, right, about Japanese people.
Yeah, he mentions how if you observe a Japanese person, you'll notice they pay very close attention to their breathing. They hold themselves in a way that keeps their breathing in good order.
Finding a deep internal sense of well-being in it.
Exactly. Because this energy is focused on the breath and the chest, rather than the limbs and metabolism, he says the Asiatic peoples develop a profound inner dream life.
They breathe in the universe, circulate it in their blood, and breathe it back out.
And that internal rhythm, according to Steiner, is why Asia produces such beautiful, wonderful cosmic poetry.
Then we move to Europe and the so-called white race, and the dynamic flips entirely. If the black body absorbs everything, the white body reflects everything.
Just like the snow in winter.
Steiner argues that Europeans reflect all external light and heat from the cosmos, sending it all back.
Which means if they're going to have any warmth or light, they have to generate it entirely internally through their own blood.
And to generate this internal light and warmth, they can't rely on the hindbrain's metabolism or the midbrain's breathing.
No, they have to use the forebrain. The front of the head, the intellect, the center of thinking.
But wait, how does he justify that? I mean, European history is full of romanticism, deeply emotional art, passionate religious movements. How does he explain away all that feeling and claim Europeans are only using their intellect?
He views that as the tragic, fatal flaw of his own European culture. Because they are so reliant on the forebrain to generate their own internal light, they become deeply detached from their true, deep inner feelings.
He states bluntly that Europeans feel the head only when it is ill.
Yeah. Otherwise, they don't feel their inner selves at all. This hyper-focus on the external world and the intellect makes Europeans inherently prone to crass materialism.
They become the engineers of the world.
Exactly. Constantly observing and manipulating the outside because they have lost the inner cosmic connection that the instinctual or feeling-based races possess.
He shares a really specific anecdote to illustrate this stark difference in worldview involving a Japanese screw steamer.
It perfectly captures his sociological views. Some Japanese sailors had stealthily watched Europeans operating a steamer and decided they wanted to manage it alone.
The Europeans stay back on the shore, and the Japanese take the ship out onto the water.
And the ship just starts spinning in continuous circles.
They couldn't figure out how to translate the revolving movement of the screw into forward motion.
Right. And Steiner paints this vivid picture of the European engineers standing on the shore, grinning tremendously at the spectacle.
What is the broader sociological claim he is trying to make with a story about a boat?
He uses it to argue that independent, external, problem-solving thought, the kind required to invent and operate complex machinery, is exclusively developed by the European forebrain.
So in his view, Asian cultures can assimilate and process inventions, but they don't inherently generate them from scratch.
Because their midbrain development points them inward, toward feeling and poetry, not outward toward mechanical engineering. Across the Earth, the races are fundamentally dependent on one another.
Their brain structures and cosmic functions are so specialized that they physically need each other's natural abilities to form a complete, functioning world.
That's his argument.
But this incredibly fragile, specialized balance relies heavily on people staying in the exact geographic zones that match their cosmic light absorption. What happens when migration enters the chat? Because human history is defined by movement.
When people migrate out of these highly specific cosmic zones, Steiner's framework dictates that the results are catastrophic. He introduces a theory of displacement.
Okay.
For instance, he looks at the eastward migration of the yellow race to the islands between Asia and Australia. When they moved east, he says they became the brown Malays.
Suddenly, they are in a different relationship with the sun.
Yes, and they are forced to absorb more light and heat than they did in Asia.
But their underlying bone structure was already set for a specific, lower degree of warmth.
Right. When they try to absorb all this new, intense energy, they literally don't have the biological nature for it. Their bodies begin to break to pieces. He bluntly states that they die from the sun,
Wow.
and he applies an inverted logic to the westward migration. He claims that in ancient times, the black race migrated west across the Atlantic and became Native Americans, or what he calls the copper-red race.
In this new Western environment, they receive significantly less light and heat than they did in Africa.
Instead of absorbing everything, they are forced to reflect some of it back, which is why he says they gleam copper-red, like the metal copper, which reflects a little light.
Just like the eastward migration, their nature was originally organized to absorb maximum heat.
Because they're getting too little, they can't develop their instinctual life properly. All this unprocessed energy turns to what he calls ash.
And this ash deposits directly into their bones.
Yes, he claims their bones become frightfully strong, so strong that the entire human being goes to pieces because of their own skeleton.
He views both of these migrating groups as perishing because they are cosmically out of alignment with their geography. Just a quick reminder for you listening, we are reporting on this to show how thinkers in the 1920s categorized humanity.
Yes, it is truly wild to hear complex, rich histories of human migration and vibrant indigenous cultures forced into these rigid rules of decay.
Where human destiny is trapped by geography and bone ash.
We have to remember the context of 1923. Europe was still reeling from the devastation of the First World War. There was a profound crisis of meaning, a desperate search for order in a world that felt chaotic.
At the same time, biological sciences were advancing rapidly.
Right. Thinkers like Steiner were trying to synthesize this new, intimidating scientific materialism with ancient spiritual concepts. Unfortunately, the result was often this kind of pseudo-biological map-making.
Using spiritual authority to justify and explain cultural hierarchies and the brutal realities of colonialism.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Steiner then turns his attention to the Europeans migrating to America. According to him, they don't die out, but they undergo some bizarre physical and psychological mutations.
The Europeans, masters of the forebrain and completely reliant on internal thought, crossed the ocean to settle in America. The new environment makes entirely different cosmic demands on them,
The energy actually shifts backward in the head.
moving away from the forebrain and reverting toward the hindbrain.
The physical result of this brain shift is fascinating. He claims that the descendants of Europeans who settle in America develop slightly longer arms and legs.
Because the cosmic forces are activating the hindbrain and the deep metabolism again, fueling the limbs.
The psychological and cultural shifts he describes are even more pronounced.
The European is naturally a brooder, living entirely in the inner intellect. In America, that brooding stops. Instinct starts to take over again.
He illustrates this with a really funny contrast between European and American literature. He notes that if you read a European book, even a 400-page novel, it is obsessed with proving things.
You read 400 pages of agonizing philosophical proofs, and by the end, nothing is actually proven.
An American book doesn't bother with proof, it simply asserts.
He compares it to a lion. A lion doesn't write a proof that he's going to eat another animal, he just eats it. Europeans prove, Americans assert.
What is the specific example he gives from the source?
He uses the example of a text on the digestion of the cockchafer beetle.
A very specific choice.
Very. He says the European book will begin with a long, drawn-out philosophical justification. Something like, the animal species of the cockchafer contains also digestive organs. They only withdraw from ordinary observation. One must penetrate deeper into the whole organization.
And on and on. You have to intellectually prove why you are even looking at the beetle in the first place.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the American book simply starts when one dismembers a cockchafer, then one finds it at that and that.
Observation. Assertion. Moving on.
Moving right along.
Okay, so Americans assert instead of proving. It's a funny literary critique. But how does this shift in thinking actually connect to his grand spiritual worldview? So what does this all mean for anthroposophy?
For Steiner, it's a matter of spiritual life or death. He worries deeply that if you take his complex, forebrain-driven spiritual science anthroposophy, developed in Europe out of pure spirit, and handed to an American culture of assertion and instinct, it degrades.
It transforms into something else entirely.
He calls it a wooden doll.
A caricature of true spirituality.
He points to things like Spiritism as proof. Spiritism was hugely popular in America at the time, involving seances and mediums.
It wants to talk about ghosts and spirits, but it imagines them as literal, physical cloud phenomena.
Spiritism and anthroposophy are entirely distinct to him. Anthroposophy seeks a rigorous philosophical engagement with the spiritual world. Spiritism is trying to grasp the spiritual by dragging it down into the most crass, naturalistic, materialistic terms possible.
It wants to weigh and measure ghosts.
Precisely.
Does he think American culture is permanently doomed to this kind of wooden, materialistic spirituality?
Actually, no. He weaves astrology into this framework to predict a massive future shift. He talks about the precession of the equinoxes, specifically the movement of the vernal point.
The Earth wobbles on its axis, meaning the background constellation behind the sun on the first day of spring slowly changes over periods of about 260 years.
Right. He notes that the vernal point had been in the sign of Aries, was currently in Pisces, but was eventually moving into the sign of Aquarius.
And when the sun fully rises in Aquarius, he predicts that American civilization will truly flourish.
That blatant wooden materialism will actually sprout into a powerful, genuine spiritual element. The future is moving west, but it has to wait for cosmic alignment to reach its full spiritual potential.
Which brings us to the climax of his lecture and the core of his frustration with the scientific establishment in Europe.
He tells a story about attending a recent natural science conference. He was listening to materialistic scholars who were openly admitting that their science was hitting a wall.
They couldn't truly understand the essence of the human being anymore.
Instead of looking to the spirit or considering a holistic view, one of these scientists allegedly cried out in frustration.
Give us corpses so that we may dismember them.
They wanted more dead bodies to study, thinking that if they just cut up enough corpses, they would finally understand the secret of life.
It's quite a dark image.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is Steiner's ultimate rhetorical masterstroke in this lecture. He is contrasting this morbid, materialistic corpse mentality of modern science with his own mission.
He argues that anthroposophy doesn't need corpses.
It seeks to observe and study the living human being. This desire to understand the holistic living person is exactly why he wrote works like The Threefold Commonwealth.
That was his practical, socioeconomic attempt to restructure society into three independent spheres: the economy, politics, and culture.
He was desperately trying to inject the human soul back into both science and societal organization.
Let's pull all of this together. We have just walked through a 1923 lecture where Rudolf Steiner wove together the physics of light absorption, the anatomical development of the hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain, global geography, migration patterns, and the massive astrological ages into one worldview.
It is a stunningly complex, if deeply flawed attempt to explain literally everything about human diversity and the future of civilization.
As a takeaway, it's vital to remember that modern genetics, anthropology, and neurology completely refute this framework. Skin color is an evolutionary adaptation to UV radiation, not a reflection of cosmic heat processing.
And brain structures certainly don't dictate racial destiny. As a historical document, however, it remains an utterly fascinating artifact.
It shows us how early 20th century thinkers desperately tried to find profound interconnectedness and meaning in human biology.
Even as they used those theories to build restrictive, arbitrary walls between different cultures.
It really makes you think about how we categorize knowledge and the people around us. Steiner heavily criticized materialistic scientists for wanting to dissect corpses rather than study living humans.
He certainly did.
But when we try to force the infinite living complexity of human diversity into rigid theoretical boxes, whether those boxes are based on skin color, brain halves, or geography, aren't we in a way pinning a butterfly to a board? Are we really studying the living, or are you just creating a different kind of corpse, something for you to mull over as you go about your day? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the archives. We'll catch you next time.